may be seated. Have you ever heard a prayer that sounded more like a sermon? Maybe you've been gathered around a holiday meal, just about to eat, and the person appointed to pray has decided that the Spirit is moving them to speak what is on their heart. Your head is bowed, your eyes are closed, and you are trying really hard to focus in prayer while this person is just going on and on. Maybe you've been in church or in a small group, and right when you thought the prayer was going to wrap up, you hear another, "We just ask you, Lord." Maybe one too many times. Once you ask any preacher to pray, you might get a sermon out of them, especially if there's a little music playing underneath. I don't believe that this type of prayer happens very often in this church. No, our Sunday morning community represents the other end of the spectrum when it comes to extemporaneous prayer. I have learned over the last 3 years that the prayers here are structured and codified and repeated like a training regiment that an athlete might learn or an etude that a musician prepares as a part of their studies. Through the repetition and the structure in the prayer, we find deeper meaning and build a foundation. Our gospel reading this morning includes a heady, theologically heavy prayer that sounds more like a sermon. I would like to set a scene for you. I'd like you to hear this prayer spoken by Jesus, surrounded by the disciples who were probably thinking, this prayer should have been a sermon. The prayer delivered by Jesus in our lectionary text this morning might seem a bit overwhelming at first. The full prayer actually takes up the whole chapter, 25 verses in total. Even from the selection that we have here, you can recognize the high-level discourse that is a characteristic of the Gospel of John. In verses 7 and 8, Jesus says, "Now they know that everything you have given me is from you, for the words that you gave to me I have given to them, and they have received and know them in truth that I came from you, and have believed that you sent me." Whoever composed the Gospel of John took it upon themselves not only to tell the story of the life and ministry of Jesus, but to write a gospel narrative that addressed the theological questions and debates of the early church. In this prayer, Jesus is defined for who he is, how he relates to God, and their relationship to the rest of the world. There is no ambiguity. For example, think about how each of the four Gospels start. First, we have Mark's Gospel, which starts with John the Baptist in the wilderness. Boom, right to the point. No messing around. Next, we have Matthew and Luke, which both start with the Christmas story, more or less. Not quite as direct as Mark, but still to the point, and at least we are starting with some story about Jesus. But how does the Gospel of John start? Does anybody remember? In the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Wow, what an opening line. Right off the bat, John is deep into heavy theological questions while using such rich poetic text. No wilderness, no stories, no manger, in the beginning. The author of John, or possible authors, understand writing as a very serious opportunity for their larger theological goals. This prayer, spoken as a farewell speech, is no exception to this essential mission. Building upon the theological context of John, it is important to examine how exactly this prayer fits within the larger story. Jesus is delivering this prayer in the upper room with all of the disciples present. In John's Gospel, Jesus gathers the disciples not for the Last Supper, but only to wash their feet and to impart some wisdom. This prayer concludes the teachings in the previous 3.5 chapters. Immediately after, Jesus and the disciples head out to the garden across the Kidron Valley, where Jesus is subsequently betrayed and arrested, kicking off the events of the Passion story. With this context, some biblical scholars believe that this prayer serves a priestly purpose. Jesus is presiding over his own imminent sacrifice on the cross. While that interpretation is fine, I read this text and imagine Jesus leading a scared group of followers who are gathered in the upper room while tensions build outside. Did the disciples know what would immediately come after? Jesus absolutely did. The disciples certainly knew that by entering Jerusalem, hailed as the King of Israel, Jesus became a revolutionary and political target, and that the full force of the state would be upon him. Amidst this tension outside, Jesus delivers a prayer of protection and commissioning. His aim is to comfort the frightened disciples and prepare them for the ministry ahead without him. Within this lengthy prayer lies a short collect that encompasses the larger point. Holy Father, protect them in your name that you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one. What does Jesus mean by protection? Surely it's not our own understanding of protection. The world understands protection to mean the use of violence or its escalation. Jesus directly rebukes this human definition in the very next chapter, as he tells Peter to put his sword away after cutting someone's ear off. The gospel understanding of protection is within this prayer, so that they may be one as we are one. Or as the student protesters in the Emerson encampment put it, we keep us safe. In this prayer, Jesus reminds the disciples and us as the modern reader that we do not belong to the world, just as Jesus does not belong to the world. This phrase is actually repeated twice within the prayer, almost back to back. Our modern ears may be uncomfortable hearing this. Christians today largely do understand their place in the world and may recognize the damage that a literal interpretation of they do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world, might bring. You may hear these words and think about the harm done to a world Christians supposedly do not belong to. However, within this section lies a deeper meaning. Jesus says, I am not asking you to take them out of the world, but I ask you to protect them from the evil one. The disciples, and all of us by extension, are not called to detach ourselves from the world. I am reminded most that we do not belong to the world when its evil is most apparent. I am reminded that I do not belong to the world when the world values order rather than justice, security rather than peace, or unity rather than restoration. As Christians, we navigate a difficult balance of being called to the world through Jesus Christ while not belonging to it. While examining our relationship to the world and its meaning for this text, it's important to remember how the author's intended audience would have responded. This gospel is tapping into an important history of defining the line between the sacred and the profane. The fourth gospel is filled with images of light versus dark, good versus evil. In John, when people understand Jesus or recognize him, it usually takes place during the day. At night is when Jesus is misunderstood or betrayed. In order to fully understand this text and to hear Jesus' prayer as intended, we must set aside our own modern preconceptions. Jesus is not praying on behalf of the world, a tough pill to swallow. Does that mean that this prayer is inclusionary? In the following two verses, which were not included in the lectionary text, shed some more light on this question. Jesus said, I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. As you, Father, are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. These additional verses indicate that Jesus is praying not only for those who are physically present with him, but extend to those who believe in me through their word. If we wish to see this prayer or text as inclusionary, it is on us to make it inclusive to everyone through our word. While preparing for this sermon, I found myself reading this text and recognizing that our community could use a prayer of protection and commissioning as well. The cathedral has experienced a challenging Easter season over the last 7 weeks. We continue to see a turnover of staff, and many of us have not felt safe around this building. This neighborhood in particular has experienced both too much violence and an apathy towards true public safety. Our elected leadership seem to be unwilling or unable to address the systemic issues in order to improve everyone's sense of safety. In our world, we are confronted with images of brutality from the response of police to student protesters and the 7 months of genocide in Gaza. I believe that we could use this prayer of protection both from the scary things that we have experienced and the uncertainty ahead in the life of the church. Henry Nouwen, the 20th century Catholic priest and one of my favorites, said, "Prayer as a hopeful and joyful waiting for God is a really superhuman task unless we realize that we do not have to wait alone." He goes on, "In the community of faith, we can find the climate and the support to sustain and deepen our prayer, and we are enabled to constantly look forward beyond our own immediate and often narrowing private needs. As much as this is a time to recognize the challenges ahead, it is also a time of a renewed sense of mission for our community. As we celebrate Pentecost next week, we will be asked to renew our baptismal vows. We will be asked to persevere in resisting evil, to proclaim by word and example the good news, to seek and serve Christ in all persons, and to strive for justice and peace among all people. Next week, the next bishop of this diocese will be elected. Next month, the General Convention convenes to steer the future of the church. As scary and uncertain as these things may feel, the life of the church continues on. I would like to end this morning by reading once again the prayer from Jesus to the disciples, and let it be a prayer for you of protection and commissioning. Will you pray with me? Jesus prayed, "I have made your name known to those whom you have gave me from the world. They were yours, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know that everything you have given me is from you. For the words that you gave to me I have given to them, and they have received them and know in truth that I came from you. And they have believed that you sent me. I am asking on their behalf. I am not asking on behalf of the world, but on behalf of those whom you gave me, because they are yours. All mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I have been glorified in them. And now I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world. I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them in your name that you have given them, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them in your name that you have given me. I guarded them, and not one of them was lost except the one destined to be lost, so that Scripture might be fulfilled. But now I am coming to you, and I speak these things in the world so that they may have my joy made complete in themselves. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. I am not asking you to take them out of the world, but I ask you to protect them from the evil one. They do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. And for their sakes, I sanctify myself, so that they may also be sanctified in truth. Amen.